What's going on, everybody? Khalifa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Now, as that long name suggests, this phone is the successor to last year's Moto G Stylus 5G that came out in the summer of 2021. And I gotta say, this phone is actually quite a bit of an upgrade. And considering that most of the more recent Motorola phones have been more or less downgrades from their predecessors, seeing a newer Motorola phone that's actually better than the previous one was a nice surprise. So in this video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. Now, as always, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, stay tuned because I will be making tons of videos about it in the near future. But with that being said, let's get started. Now, with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 396, an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, and a screen to body ratio of about 85.8%. So this display is pretty much good all across the board. We got a really large size, in fact, pretty much the largest size display you can get for a smartphone. We also got a 1080p resolution, so the image is going to be nice and crisp. The colors and brightness look really good overall, and with the 120Hz refresh rate, movement on the screen is going to be a little bit smoother and faster, and that's going to be great if you're consuming content, and when you're just navigating through the phone in general, it's going to feel a little bit more premium. Now obviously it probably doesn't even look any different from normal in this video, but I will say in person when you're actually using this phone, it does feel quite a bit more premium, and having the higher refresh rate definitely improves your experience when you're consuming content. Now, another cool thing about this display that's kind of easy to miss is the dimensions. Now, with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9, we're getting a slightly taller and more narrow form factor than your average phone. I want to say 20:9 is the average aspect ratio for a smartphone today, and while this may not sound like it makes a huge difference, when you're doing something like viewing photos in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a much more immersive cinematic looking experience. And even if you're just doing something simple like reading an article on the web, you'll be able to fit a little bit more content onto the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, while it may or may not really make that much of a difference depending on what you're doing with your phone, having a taller and more narrow form factor is typically going to make your experience a little bit better. Now, the only thing I really don't like about this display is actually pretty situational, and depending on where you are, it may or may not even make a difference to you. But personally, despite having really good brightness and nice looking colors, I would say this phone is a little hard to see when you're outside in direct sunlight. Now actually, just this morning I was outside taking test photos, and I was wearing a pair of polarized sunglasses, and with those sunglasses on, this display is pretty much impossible to see in landscape mode, so I actually had to take them off, which I don't like doing in this type of weather. So if you are planning on being out in the sun a lot, definitely keep this in mind. But as you can see, indoors it does look perfectly fine. In fact, the display is really good, and for the most part, unless you're in that really specific situation, you're really not going to have any issues. Now for storage, this phone has 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so that's really a lot. There are really only a few phones that have more storage than this, and those are flagship phones that are really expensive, quite a bit more expensive than this phone at least. So if you're a power user, if you have a bunch of apps, photos and videos, that stuff, then this phone is going to be a great choice for you. And what's even better is this phone actually does have microSD card expansion, whereas higher end flagship phones typically don't. So if you're looking for a phone with a lot of storage, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to be a great option. Now, one thing to keep in mind, depending on where you get this phone, the storage might be a little different. I haven't actually looked yet at which carriers currently have this phone, but I'm assuming all of them are going to get it. And when they do, if you buy this phone through them, there might be a slight difference in storage. That's usually the case. So for example, if you get this phone through Cricket, you're most likely only going to have 128GB. At least that's what happened when I got my last Moto G Stylus 5G. So definitely keep this in mind. I personally got this phone factory unlocked from Motorola, and it does have 256GB, but this may be different depending on which variant you get. Now there's no wireless charging with this phone, which is not very surprising, but we do have a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. Definitely a nice spot for it, and that's one difference between this phone and its predecessor, because the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 had a fingerprint scanner right back here, but with this phone there's really nothing going on the back, which I personally like a little bit better. Now this phone also has face unlock, so we're getting two options here to get into it, but let's go ahead and give this fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, this fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive, no issues here. And again, remember there is face unlock too, so if you'd rather use that, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, for the front facing camera we got a hole punch design, looks real nice and clean, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So this is definitely a nice camera setup that, despite only being a triple camera, has pretty much all the features. It's pretty much the exact same camera setup as the regular Moto G Stylus 2022 that came out in February, and I do think it's pretty cool that they combine the ultra wide camera and the macro camera, really condenses things down, makes it a little bit more simple, while at the same time giving you pretty much the same exact features. To give you an idea of what this camera setup can do, here's some photos taken with the main camera. As you can see, they are pretty good photos. The details look real nice and sharp, the photos themselves are decently bright, and I do like the colors. But I will say, if you're looking for something really professional and high-end, then you can do better, especially for the price of this phone. It's nothing really special, and compared to something like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, while the photos taken with this phone are good, I don't think they're really that good. Now if you're more of a casual camera user, if that's not really your top priority, but you still want to get some nice photos here and there, maybe for social media, something like that, then this phone will definitely get the job done, and I really do appreciate that it has so many different features. But at the same time, if the camera is really a top priority for you, in this price range, I do think you can do better. Now here's a couple photos taken with the ultra wide camera. Again, definitely not bad photos. In fact, the ultra wide camera is pretty impressive. The details and quality are still pretty sharp and the distortion is minimal. And overall, if you want to get some scenery pictures, maybe a skyline picture, something like that, this ultra wide camera will definitely get the job done. Now here's a photo taken with portrait mode in the rear camera. Real nice photo here, don't really have any complaints. Here's some photos taken with the macro camera. Now with the macro camera, I'm not really super impressed. It is okay, and if you want to get some close-up detailed images from time to time, it will get the job done. But again, there are several phones out there in a pretty similar price range that are a little bit better. Like for example, the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. For the price range, the macro camera on that phone was insane. But with this phone, it's honestly pretty average. Now that's not to say these photos are bad per se, but if you're trying to do serious photography where things look really professional and really sharp details, all that, then again, you can probably do better. But in general, while I'm not overly impressed with the photos, and they're of course nowhere near the level of a $1,000 flagship phone, I do think for most people, the camera of the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 will get the job done. Now for video, this phone can shoot in up to 1080p at 60 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K unfortunately, which I do think is quite a bit of a drawback. Not really so much because I think everyone's going to be using 4K, but because pretty much every other phone I've seen in this price range does have 4K. For example, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G and the A33 5G and the iPhone SE, to name a few. All of those phones can shoot 4K videos in at least the rear camera, if not the front. And in the case of the iPhone SE, which I do want to remind you is pretty much the exact same MSRP as this phone, that phone can actually shoot 4K videos at 60 frames per second. So really, if you want to take super high quality videos, the Moto G Stylus 5G, since it can't even shoot in 4K, is probably not going to be the best choice. But that being said, here's a video sample I did take in 1080p. This one was shot at 30 frames per second. I was going to do 60, but I kind of forgot. But as you can see, it's a pretty decent video. Maybe not the best, but it is decent if you're shooting a video for maybe social media, something like that. But if you're doing something like a vlog or some sort of YouTube video, I would say in this price range, you can do better. But I will give credit where credit is due. The autofocus is really good. It's really fast and I was pretty impressed with that. Now internally, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now it's nice to see that we're getting 8GB of RAM here. That's actually quite a bit, and I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and we got a single core score of 672 and a multi-core score of 1917. So this is the first time in quite a while that I've seen a new Motorola phone that actually has a faster processor than its predecessor. Now by itself, this score might not mean a whole lot to you, because with this kind of test, you really need something to compare it to. So I do recommend running a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current phone and comparing the results to these. And that way you can kind of see for yourself whether or not this phone would be an upgrade for you, because who knows, maybe your device is actually faster. but honestly, I've run this test so many times on so many different phones, I just kind of know this is actually a really good score, especially for a mid-range phone like this. And this is also quite a bit faster than the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 that came out last year. So for once, Motorola is actually giving us an upgrade, and that's really nice to see. In fact, compared to pretty much every other phone in this price range, this is still really competitive. It's about on par with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G and the A53 5G. Sure, it's nowhere near the level of flagship phones like the iPhone SE and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, or really any of those higher end devices. But as far as mid-range phones are concerned, while there still are some phones out there that are a little bit faster, this is pretty solid overall. So really, no matter what you're doing with this phone, unless you're playing a really high-end game like Fortnite at super high graphics mode or something like that, then this phone is probably going to be able to handle pretty much anything perfectly fine. So if you're on your phone a lot, if you're browsing the web, going on social media, streaming lots of videos, and doing a moderate amount of mobile gaming, the Moto G Stylus 5G is definitely going to get the job done. And again, as the name suggests, this is a 5G phone, and while getting a 5G phone isn't absolutely necessary yet, I do think it's a good idea because it gives you access to the latest technology. And at the end of the day, while 4G isn't going away anytime soon, 5G connectivity really never hurts. So in general, when it comes to processing power, I do think that's one of this phone's biggest strengths. And if that's something that's really a priority for you, the Moto G Stylus 5G is definitely going to be a great option. And speaking of big strengths, the battery of this phone is also really impressive at 5,000 milliamp hours, supporting 15-watt fast charging. So we're getting a really large battery here, and no matter what you do with your phone, who doesn't want a larger battery? And at 5,000 milliamp hours, we're getting pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone. So you're going to get plenty of battery life throughout the day, which is great if you have a more mobile lifestyle and you're not always around a charger. And then down the road for longevity, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, since we're already starting out with so much battery life, quite a bit more than you need, then as the battery capacity gets a little bit smaller, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly as you would with a smaller battery overall. In addition to this, the 15-watt fast charging doesn't hurt either. Sure, it's not the strongest fast charging out there. In fact, pretty much every other phone in this price range has better fast charging, but I will tell you from experience, this phone does charge up pretty fast, so you probably won't even notice the difference. Another really nice thing about this phone, now this is actually the first time I've seen it in a mid-range Motorola phone, but it does have NFC, so if you want to use something like Google Pay, for the first time in the history of Moto G phones, you actually can with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now Motorola is honestly pretty late to the party with this, because pretty much every Samsung Galaxy A series except the super low-end ones have this feature, and they have had it for quite a while, but for whatever reason, the Moto G phones, all the ones in the US at least, haven't got that feature until this phone. But that being said, it's better late than never, and now that this phone does have NFC, we no longer have to worry about the disadvantage of not having it. So if you do want to use contactless mobile payment services, again like Google Pay, Amex Pay, any of that stuff, you'll be happy to know that with the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022, you actually can. But now that we've gone over some of the specs and features of the phone, let's take a closer look at the device itself. So on the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the microSD card. On the bottom, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack, which is one big advantage this phone has over something like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, because for whatever reason, Samsung is starting to take away the headphone jack from some of their mid-range phones. So if you do want a higher end mid-range phone that does have a headphone jack, the Moto G Stylus 5G is one of the few that actually still does. Then of course, we got the USB-C port, the microphone, the speaker, and as the phone is named after, the stylus itself. Now, I'm going to be doing a whole video about the stylus, so I'm going to make this part quick, but I will say the stylus is quite a bit better than it was in the past. Sure, it's not sensitive enough to do actual art, but you can actually comfortably write on it. Well, sort of. So like I was saying, you can actually sort of write on it. Now again, it's not going to be nearly sensitive enough for doing something like actual art, but if you like to take handwritten notes from time to time, you definitely can with this phone. And again, it works quite a bit better than previous versions of this phone. And seeing that really this is one of the only phones on the market anymore that actually has a stylus built into it, it's nice that they're still improving it. Now on the right side of the phone, we got the power key that once again is the fingerprint scanner. Volume down, volume up. On the top of the phone, we got the noise cancelling microphone. On the back, we got our camera setup and our flash. The back has this nice metallic finish. I do think it looks pretty good and I really like the color on this. As you can see here, it does pick up a few fingerprints, but it's really not that bad. Now the phone is made entirely out of plastic, and it really does feel like it too. It doesn't feel the most premium, although I will say it has quite a bit of weight to it. So for not being a flagship phone, and really again only being made out of plastic, except of course the glass display, the phone actually doesn't feel half bad. And the build quality is really good too. The buttons feel really sturdy. So in general, I really have no complaints about the design. But in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. In general, I do think this phone is really good for what it is, and I also think it's quite a bit of an upgrade from its predecessor. Now, in case you're actually interested in seeing this phone compared directly to that phone, I will be doing a comparison between this phone and the Moto G Stylus 5G 2021 in the future. So if you do want to see that, definitely subscribe to the channel because that is coming. But again, I will say this phone is actually really impressive for what it is. There are certain things that I do think could have been done better. For example, the camera quality, especially when it comes to videos. Pretty much all of this phone's direct competitors, like mostly the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, I feel like that's the best comparison. That phone can shoot 4K videos, and unfortunately the Moto G Stylus 5G can't. And it's weird because the Moto G Stylus 2021, not even the 5G version, just the regular Moto G Stylus that came out early last year, that phone could shoot 4K videos, but they took that feature away and never brought it back. And it really made no sense to me because as time goes on, more and more phones are being able to shoot 4K videos. So not getting it on such a nice phone like this, especially for the price, that really is a disappointment. But really other than that, I do think this is a great device. So if you're looking for a solid mid-range phone with a great display, a really fast processor, a large battery, tons of storage, and a pretty good camera setup, and of course we can't forget a stylus. Honestly, I forget every time I cover this phone. Then the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 is going to be a great option. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be making tons of videos about it in the future, so stay tuned. But that's it for today. As always, I will see you in the next video.